Hey there, I am Koaw, and I have captured, photographed, thoroughly studied, and created a digital field guide for all sunfishes within the genus Lepomis. We call these lepomids, or common sunfishes. And don't feel bad if you're having a hard time identifying your common sunfish. This is actually one of the reasons I created this guide, is because I saw a lot of my fellow fishers misidentifying these species. So in this video, you will learn all you need to know that will stay with you for a lifetime. Now, if you do have a sunfish right now that you want to ID, put it in your live well, or better yet, just take a few photos of it, unless you're going to eat it, because it's not good to keep the fish out of the water for more than a minute or so. A nice lateral shot or a shot of the side of the fish will do you fine, with the fins splayed out as much as possible, but more photos are always better, like a close-up of the head and the pectoral fin. Both pectoral fins if you can get them, and I do suggest getting a shot of the gill rakers if you know how. It's an identification skill most anglers don't utilize, but it can be very valuable, especially when hybrids are involved. And I made another video linked in the description that shows you how to look at those gill rakers, but you can check that out at another time, because we're going to identify your sunfish in this video. So yes, this is KNFS Smarts, where we fishers are always learning and sharing knowledge about fishing and fishes. This video is essentially the 5th step in a 6-step identification guide I've created for this genus that is entirely available on my website at koaw.org/sunfishes. More specifically, this whole video is on the koaw.org/sunfish cheat sheet. There are currently 13 recognized species of lepomids, and that number may change as this genus, like most other groups of fishes, is constantly going through dynamic, systematic, and taxonomic changes, especially as we harness new DNA technologies. For example, the longear sunfish species complex has been in taxonomic dispute for well over 100 years, and might have some resolution in the near future, or at least better resolution. So lepomids are most often called sunfishes or common sunfishes, and this genus belongs to the family of Syncharchidae, which is also commonly called sunfishes, hence why this particular genus, Lepomis, is better called common sunfishes. The family of sunfishes contains many familiar species to anglers, including the black basses like your largemouth bass and smallmouth bass, and the crappies, and other fishes like mud sunfish and rock bass. Lepomids are native only to North America, but they have been introduced to other places including Europe, parts of Asia, and South Africa. And the pumpkinseed is now quite prevalent in many European countries. Let's first make sure that you have a lepomid, and I'll do that by going over the common features of all the common sunfishes and compare them against species outside of this genus. So firstly, all common sunfishes come from freshwater, not saltwater, although occasionally you may find some populations in brackish waters. All of the common sunfishes have 3 anal spines. It is absolutely rare to find a lepomid specimen with anything but 3 anal spines. Small crappies may be confused with certain lepomids like the orange-spotted sunfish, but crappies will have 6 or 7 anal spines. You'll also notice that crappies will have fewer dorsal spines, as lepomids usually have 10, sometimes 9 or 11. Likewise, the mud sunfish may be confused with a warmouth, as they both have those lines radiating from the eyes, but again, a warmouth is a lepomid and only has 3 anal spines, while the mud sunfish usually has 5 anal spines. Young rock bass also look a lot like warmouth, as young rock bass retain a lot of the irregular saddle pattern, though an anal spine count quickly reveals which is a lepomid with 3 anal spines and which is not. And when I was down in North Carolina, I pulled these 2 specimens, a spotted sunfish and a flyer, from the same pool, and now I realized that they look very similar. But again, just note that our spotted sunfish has 3 anal spines and a flyer has 7 to 8 anal spines. The black basses of macrochirus, like your largemouth bass and smallmouth bass, will also have 3 anal spines, just like the members of the sister genus Lepomis that we're looking at. But all the black basses have much more elongated bodies than that of the common sunfishes. Lepomids have deep bodies in that the vertical height of the body makes up a large part of the horizontal length. Black basses have a body depth that is less than 30% of the standard length, while lepomids have body depths that are usually around 40 to 50% of the standard length. Also, most species of black basses have a dark lateral band running along the body, a feature not present on any lepomid. Next, to make sure that you have a lepomid, besides looking for those 3 anal spines and a deep body, there will more than likely be a conspicuous opercular flap or ear flap on the back of the head. Most species of lepomids have color on this opercular flap, though keep in mind that on any larval forms, or even still on some juveniles, the opercular flap is likely not visible or well developed with color, so this is really better to look at on mature or semi-mature specimens. Finally, look at the caudal fin or tail fin. It will be slightly indented on all lepomids, where we can also call this emarginated or shallowly forked. Another genus within the same family closely related to lepomids is that of Aeneacanthus. The species of this genus, just like the other lepomids, have 3 anal spines and a fairly conspicuous opercular flap, as well as a similar body shape. But the caudal fin will most often be rounded or truncated, as in there will not be the indentation that is present on the caudal fin like that of what is seen on lepomids. So now let's get into the quick identification tricks for all of the lepomids. And I do have all the individual species pages on koaw.org/sunfishes. I've also created individual range maps for each species, which includes native and introduced ranges. And I will be creating individual videos for most of the species. The Warmouth one is already done and posted here on KNFS Smarts. A quick reminder to subscribe and join the community while you're thinking on it. And also, by liking this video, that'll bookmark it in your YouTube library in case you need it for a quick reference in the future. So we're going to go over the key features, and what I'm covering here assumes that you have a pure or a mostly pure specimen. For hybrid information, there is some good base content on my website. Fisheries biologist by the name of Bob Jacobs, who has worked extensively with hybrid lepomids and written field guides of his own, was a senior advisor on this project, and he really provided some great advice, of which, in tandem with my research, has some really great information for you. I have already created one hybrid video here on KNFS Smarts for how to ID the green gill, the hybrid between the bluegill and the green sunfish. Pectoral fin. If the pectoral fin is long and pointy, extending past the eye, if you were to bend it forward, then you likely have a bluegill, a Redear sunfish, or a pumpkinseed. To tell these species apart, take a look at the opercular flap, also called the ear flap. If there is no red edging on an almost entirely black opercular flap, then you have a bluegill. And there is also a subspecies of the bluegill called the coppernose bluegill or Florida bluegill, of which I wholly believe should be a species of its own, and it might get there one day. But this subspecies is primarily found in the southeast United States, in Florida and South Georgia. The coppernose bluegill is often a very strange, colorful looking fish that may show a wide array of colors, but usually breeding males have a dark purplish sheen. Just like all bluegills, the mouth remains fairly small, the pectoral fin long and pointy, and the opercular flap is mostly with a black backed edging. But right on the front of the nape there is often a copper-like blotch. We don't see that on the northern bluegill. The median fins also display red and orange with pale margins. Sometimes those margins will be red, pink, or orange. There is also often a dark blotch on the posterior edge of the anal fin, which is also not seen on your northern bluegill, but is also seen sometimes on the green sunfish. So let's get back to the other 2 species with the long and pointy pectoral fins, the pumpkinseed and the Redear sunfish. To tell the pumpkinseed apart from the Redear sunfish, just notice that the pumpkinseed will have a bright blue iridescent streaking along the head, orange or gold spots on the upper body, and often much spotting in the median fins. If the pectoral fin is roundly and very short, not even extending to the posterior edge of the eye. If you were to bend it forward, then you'll likely have a green sunfish or a warmouth. You can easily tell a warmouth apart from a green sunfish by just examining that a warmouth has dark brown lines radiating from the eyes, and a green sunfish will have a dark dorsal blotch on the second dorsal fin. If the pectoral fin is moderately sized, extending under the pupil if bent forward, and has 12 to 11 pectoral rays, then you'll likely have a dollar sunfish or a northern sunfish. And if you need to learn how to count the rays and spines in lepomids, you guessed it, I made a video on that, and that is linked below. But mainly with pectoral rays, just remember that you count all the rays, even if they are itty bitty. So the northern sunfish and the dollar sunfish do not share overlapping ranges. So if you are in the Great Lakes region up north and you have a small sunfish with a moderately sized pectoral fin with 11 to 12 pectoral rays, then you'll likely have a northern sunfish. And if you are in the southeast, then you'll likely have the dollar sunfish. Mouth and jaw size. If the posterior edge of the maxillary aligns past the middle of the pupil or farther back, then you have a warmouth or a green sunfish. The mouths on these two species are so large that lipping the fish like you would lip largemouth bass is no problem. If the posterior edge of the maxillary aligns to or just past the anterior edge of the pupil, then you'll likely have an orange-spotted sunfish, a redbreast sunfish, or a bantam sunfish. The orange-spotted sunfish and redbreast sunfish have overlapping ranges. They both may have orange spots along the body. To tell these two species apart, simply look at the opercular flap. The orange-spotted sunfish will have a whitish edging around the entire posterior end of the flap, while the redbreast will have a longer ear flap that has no edging on the posterior end and a bluish pale edging on the top and bottom. If you have a specimen with a small mouth where the posterior edge of the maxillary does not extend past the anterior edge of the eye or is near that edge, then you likely have a northern sunfish, a bluegill, a Redear sunfish, or a pumpkinseed. So notice that the bluegill, Redear, and pumpkinseed were also the only three species with a long and pointy pectoral fin. The northern sunfish's mouth is a bit variable, but is often fairly small. And this species may be confused with the pumpkinseed, as they do have overlapping ranges. The northern sunfish does not have a long pectoral fin like the pumpkinseed does. The northern sunfish will also have much more blue iridescence in the median fins compared to the pumpkinseed. Although breeding male pumpkinseed do express a fair deal of blue, but that is more near the margins of the fins. Northern sunfish also display much more orange and red mottling in the median fins. Now let's look at one of the best features to look at when you're examining your common sunfishes, the opercular flap or ear flap. And keep in mind that the following information applies to mature specimens. If you have a lepomid with an all black opercular flap and no color around the edging, then you'll likely have a bluegill. Keep in mind that the bluegill may have some bluish green iridescence on the black portion of the opercular flap that only appears when the light hits it from a certain angle from your perspective. And there may also be a little bit of white on the anterior edging, but it won't extend far. Sometimes the bantam sunfish doesn't express any color on the ear flap and may resemble a bluegill's ear flap. The bantam sunfish is a very small fish, not getting much bigger than 4 inches, and is really only found in swamps and swamp-like habitats. The bantam sunfish has a much stoutier, thicker body than a bluegill, as well as a larger mouth relative to the eye. The pectoral fin is also not going to extend past the eye like it so often does on a bluegill. If you have a lepomid with a black posterior edge on the opercular flap that has some color dorsally and or ventrally, then you'll likely have a redbreast sunfish, a spotted sunfish, or a red-spotted sunfish. And I will get to the differences between the spotted and red-spotted here shortly. If you have a sunfish with an ear flap obviously longer than the length of the eye with some form of colored edging, not necessarily around the entire flap, then you'll likely have a long ear sunfish or a redbreast sunfish. Again, the redbreast sunfish will not have any color on the back end of that opercular flap, while the long ear sunfish will have a pale edging probably with some other faint colors mixed in around the entirety of the ear flap. If you have a sunfish with a bright, solid red spot on the posterior edge of the opercular flap that is enclosed both dorsally and ventrally by a whitish edging, then you'll likely have a northern sunfish, a pumpkinseed, or a Redear sunfish. Note that the warmouth and green sunfish will have red on the opercular flap, but the color is often diluted and or blended with purple and orange. These two species do not have that solid red spot. Also, the warmouth rarely has any pale edging on the dorsal edging of the ear flap. If you have a sunfish that has a very pale edging, with or without some other faded colors around the entire edging, dorsal, posterior, and ventral of the opercular flap, then you'll likely have an orange-spotted sunfish, a long-eared sunfish, a bantam sunfish, or a dollar sunfish. The dollar sunfish and long-eared sunfish are two species that are easily confused and do have some overlap in ranges. To distinguish these species, note that the dollar sunfish typically has 12 pectoral rays, while the long-eared typically has 14, though each species may have 13. The long-eared sunfish has a blue streak across the entire upper lip, while the dollar sunfish rarely has the blue color on the upper lip going across the entirety of that lip. The dollar sunfish also often has blue spots on the dark portion of the opercular flap, of which will usually be smaller than the long-eared opercular flap. The dollar sunfish usually has red or dark orange in the lateral line that may be presented as a few spots along the lateral line or as mini spots. The dollar sunfish is also a much smaller fish, with a max total length around 12 centimeters or 4.7 inches, while the long-eared sunfish has a maximum total length about double that of the dollar. The eye. If you have a sunfish with a bright blue iridescent bowl in the ventral part of the eye, then you either have a spotted sunfish or a red-spotted sunfish. It was only fairly recently that the red-spotted sunfish was separated from the spotted sunfish, as it used to be a subspecies. And the evolutionary splitting of these two species is actually very, very complicated, and we still have so much to figure out. Basically, the red-spotted sunfish has a more westerly range, while the spotted sunfish is in the southeast. I threw together a range map showing the approximate zone of contact, where within this range, attempting to ID a red-spotted or a spotted sunfish may be impossible, as genes have frequently been exchanged between these populations. So in this graphic, you'll see a red-spotted sunfish I caught in southern Missouri, a spotted sunfish I caught in North Carolina, and a specimen caught by Ray Wilhite in Alabama, right in the zone of contact where these species overlap. Typically, the spotted sunfish has many black spots forming irregular rows along the body, and the nape is also heavily spotted. The spotted sunfish also has more discrete or less blurry spots on the head, while the red-spotted sunfish, though having some black spots on the head, has blurry, bigger spots. The spotted sunfish may still have some orangish red spots on the body, but not usually as pronounced as what is on the red-spotted. Also, the red-spotted sunfish, especially the males, will have an orangish red edging ventrally and sometimes dorsally on that opercular flap, while this colored edging remains mostly pale on the spotted sunfish. With the specimen caught in the contact zone, we see the confused discrete black spots along the body, as well as the fairly prominent coloring of orange spots, thus making this specimen impractical to ID down to a species level. The upper lip is a good feature to examine on lepomids. So if you have a fish with an upper lip that has a bluish streaking across the entirety of the lip, then you'll likely have a long-eared sunfish, a redbreast sunfish, a northern sunfish, and at times a pumpkinseed. So once again about the long-ear, this species complex has been in taxonomic dispute for well over 100 years. Long-eared populations seem to just vary greatly in appearance across regional populations, and some ichthyologists and taxonomists have suggested numerous subspecies over the years, while others have suggested breaking these subspecies into separate species, and others don't want to break it up at all. So far, only the northern sunfish, a species once listed as a subspecies of the longear sunfish, has been split as a separate species apart from the longear species complex. And curiously, that split actually happened without any DNA evidence. It was all based off of morphological features. But we might actually see some better resolution to this matter of longear sunfish splitting very soon, as I heard there are some researchers working on it right now. So I'll be eager to read that study when it gets published and get those updates to you on the website or even here on KNFS and Smarts. The longear sunfish and northern sunfish do have touching ranges in the north, in Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. The northern sunfish has a conspicuous solid red spot on the ear flap that is not often present on the longear sunfish. The opercular flap of the northern sunfish is usually oriented at an angle upwards, while the longears is more horizontal, but that's not always a definitive tell. Plus, the longear typically has a much longer ear flap, especially on those breeding males. The northern sunfish is also a smaller fish, typically not getting bigger than 5 inches, while the longear may reach lengths of 9.5 inches. Also, the northern sunfish typically has 12 pectoral rays, sometimes 13, while the longear sunfish typically has 14 rays, though sometimes 13. If you have a fish with broken bluish streaking across the upper lip, then you'll likely have a dollar sunfish, a green sunfish, and at times a pumpkinseed. So let's talk about those spots on the body. If you have a lepomid with red or orange spots on the side of the body, then you'll likely have an orange-spotted sunfish, a red-spotted sunfish, a redbreast sunfish, or a pumpkinseed. On occasion, mature warmouth have conspicuous red or orange spots on the body, more likely on breeding males, and it just seems this is more often seen in the southern states like Texas and Florida. And let me tell you that Texas and Florida produce some of the weirdest looking lepomids I have ever seen. If you have a lepomid with many black spots along the side of the body forming irregular horizontal rows, then you likely have a spotted sunfish. Again, the red-spotted sunfish may have some black spots on the body, and those in the contact zone are often impractical to ID down to a species level. The bluegill often has dark spots along the nape and on occasion spots along the body. The bantam sunfish often has dark coffee-colored spots along the body. Large adults may have very discrete dark spots on the body. Female orange-spotted sunfish in breeding colors will have dark brown spots that may appear black. If you have a fish with blue spotting along the body, then you'll likely have a longear sunfish, a northern sunfish, a green sunfish, or a dollar sunfish. And we've already compared 3 of those species against each other, so just keep in mind that the green sunfish has a very large mouth, easily distinguishing it from the others here. The dark dorsal fin blotch. If you have a specimen with a dark blotch on the posterior end of that second dorsal fin, then you either have a bluegill, a green sunfish, or a bantam sunfish. Note that the redbreast sunfish often has darker coloration running along the proximal portion of that second dorsal fin. That may get darker posteriorly, but it's nothing as conspicuous as the other species' dark blotches on that dorsal fin. Gill rakers. Analyzing the gill rakers is a great method for identifying sunfishes, especially when hybrids get involved. And again, I made a separate video showing how to analyze those rakers, of which is linked below. It's really just about analyzing the longest rakers visible on that first gill arch. The bantam sunfish has some of the longest rakers, usually 7 to 9 times longer than wide. So yeah, keep in mind that gill rakers are a great tool, and they do vary pretty significantly between most species, but they can also vary between populations of the same species. But the trends hold true, and I got photos of rakers from every species for you. So long and thin rakers are found on the bantam sunfish, warmouth, bluegill, green sunfish, orange-spotted sunfish, spotted sunfish, and red-spotted sunfish. The redbreast sunfish has been shown to have quite variable lengths on the rakers. The thickness will be greater than any of the species above, though the length may be as long on similar-sized specimens. The Redear sunfish, longear sunfish, pumpkinseed, northern sunfish, and dollar sunfish have very short and thick rakers. The dollar sunfish by far had the knobbiest rakers compared to any other species I analyzed for this project. So here are some traits that are pretty much unique to only one species. If you have a lepomid with 3 or more dark radiating lines coming from the back of the eye, then you have a warmouth. If you have a common sunfish with a red blotch on the posterior base of the second dorsal fin, then you have a male warmouth in breeding colors. If you have a specimen with bluish-green spots on the black portion of the opercular flap and reddish spots along the lateral line, then you most likely have a dollar sunfish. If you have a sunfish with a broken lateral line, then you probably have a bantam sunfish. It's very unlikely to encounter other lepomids with a broken lateral line, but it does occasionally happen. If you have a lepomid with teeth on the tongue, then you likely have a warmouth. Although the green sunfish, according to some resources, may have a small patch of underdeveloped teeth on the tongue, I have yet to encounter a specimen as such. I wouldn't be able to make this free-to-view content without the support of my monthly contributors, the patrons, the names you see over here, as well as the one-time donators. I am ever so grateful. If you want to learn how to support KNFS and Smarts Koaw Nature, just go to that link above my head. Alright, I say to you, fish responsibly and good luck.